And once again, the camera in this room is completely not working very well. But at least for those people who are not here, they will have the benefit of the audio, I guess, since the visual is looks like I'm a big blob. Let me make sure that it has got audio running though on the. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. All right. That is working. So we got that. That's good. So we need to talk about services marketing today. So services are intangible activities or benefits that are provided to satisfy customers' needs in exchange for money or something else of value. Just like a product is sold to people in exchange for something of value. That's maybe the heart of marketing, is this idea of exchange, right? I've got something you want, you're willing to pay me something or barter for it. That's kind of what you need to have marketing occur. You have to have two people, at least two people, and you have to have something that you want to trade or exchange. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a tangible product, right? It can be a service, and that's what we'll talk about today. Services scholars like Mary Jo Bittner argue that all goods are really services. And I think I alluded to this, and so we'll see if anybody can remember what it was I sort of said. What is it that maybe is one thing that you value in and of itself and not for the service it provides you? So if you think about this, the thing that services scholars point out in this, like Mary Jo Bittner, is that when you go to lunch over at the food court and you're starving to death, you don't value the cheeseburger or whatever. What do they have cheeseburgers over there anymore? Is there still a hamburger place over there? They've changed so many times. It's been like incredible to me over the years. When they first opened the food court, they actually had like a real restaurant like Burger King, like real name brand stuff, and then it got worse and worse and worse as time went on. And I don't know what's their hamburger joint. Is it Fat Tire? Is that the one that's got it over there now? Is it? Okay. So you get your Fat Tire burger. You're not really interested in the burger for its own sake. You're interested in the fact that it satisfies this hunger that you have, right? So is there something out there that you could value in and of itself, like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, right? My precious. He values the ring for itself, right? He wants the ring for itself because he's fascinated with the ring. And is there anything that you can think of that that people value in and of themselves and not for the service that it provides? Yeah, I think you had your hand up first. Baseball cards. Okay, maybe. Why do you think that they value baseball cards for the thing in and of itself and not the value? I think, baseball cards were huge when I was a kid growing up. They're not so big anymore. I think people traded them because they wanted the idea that you could maybe make a lot of money, right? They're not terribly popular, so it's the what? The rarity of it. Okay. All right. I think you had your hand up next. The cell phone. You think people value the cell phone in and of itself rather than the service that it provides? Okay, but that's not the thing in and of itself. That's the status of it, right? Sorry. That's the status symbol that it provides. Like having the newest and latest and greatest iPhone. I think most people want the iPhone because it has FaceTime, although nobody uses FaceTime because we don't actually want to communicate in person. We really want to text. What do you think? You had your hand up?
I was thinking, but we're talking like tangible goods or
tangible goods, something that you value in and of itself.
I was going to say a skill.
A skill, okay. That's an intangible. But I think you could value a skill for the pure joy of the thing itself rather than anything else that's external. Learning to do something could be a benefit. The thing that do you have a...
Yeah, things like family heirlooms that are passed down, things that you're not actually...
Okay, yeah, I think that may be, and that's sort of along the lines of what I think is something that you might value in and of itself. something that has no real value to anyone other than you. You value the thing in and of itself. And I think art is maybe the one thing that you can say you value in and of itself rather than for the service it provides. Although for a lot of people that may not be true, in that they collect art because they think it's going to appreciate in value or because it makes a statement. You know, if you have a Picasso, you are in an elite group of people who can say, I own a Picasso. I hate Picasso. I think he was a nut. But, you know, there's an elite group of people who have this artist and have the ability to say, I own a Picasso, right? And so I think maybe even that is a little touchy. 46% or more of the US GDP is now in services, and the value of services has increased over 100% since 1990. $722 billion in services are exported every year, and that figure's actually gone up. We export a lot more in services. So the real value in the American economy now is in these intangibles. It is in services. We have moved into a post-industrial economy. So services are unique in a number of ways. And just like we have 4 Ps in marketing, product, price, place, and promotion, and we'll talk about price today, there are 4 Is of services. 1, intangibility. What does that mean? You can't really touch it. You can't experience it with your senses in the normal way that you can with products. So with a tangible product like this cup of coffee that I got from McDonald's, which has, by the way, the best coffee on the planet, in my opinion, for commercial coffee, much better than Starbucks, which is the tool of the devil. I value this coffee for, you know, the fact that I can taste it. It's really, I like black coffee. I don't put anything in my coffee. So I like the way it tastes. I like the fact that it's warm on cold days, which it's not so cold today, but on cold days it's warm. And I value the fact that it has massive amounts of caffeine, which gives me that jolt to get up here and be able to, you know, do my finest song and dance routine for you all. So intangibility of the services, unlike this product, you know, you can't really touch, taste, feel, smell, hear legal services. I'm a lawyer. I provide legal services to people. You can't touch that. You can't feel it, right? You can't smell it. You can't taste it. Inconsistency, because services, one of the things that I love about McDonald's coffee as opposed to the tool of the devil Starbucks is that it's pretty much the same all over the place. If you go to Starbucks because you don't really like coffee, what you like is you like milky, caramelly, sugary, syrupy drinks that you think are coffee. It could be highly inconsistent. Like, they try to be consistent, but, you know, you got some barista back there who, you know, is thinking about their, you know, because they're all musical theater majors or something useless like that, thinking about their routine, and they put, you know, 3 pumps of super macchiato, blah, blah, into your drink rather than 2. It's going to taste different than it is somewhere else. So they try to, through, you know, like, this is the way we make a whatever the hell it is that you people drink. You know, it's going to be, maybe have some inconsistencies there. Whereas McDonald's black coffee is McDonald's black coffee. They brew it the same way at every McDonald's, you know, across the nation, and it tastes the same. Just like the Big Mac, 2 all-beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun tastes the same all across the country. So inconsistency. If you go and get a massage at Massage Envy, you know, it's going to be highly dependent on the skill of that masseuse to deliver the service in a way that you want, right? People want different kinds of pressure. They want hot stone massages or aromatherapy massages or things like that. And those are highly personalized, and so you're going to find a lot of inconsistency. There is inseparability between the service provider and the company itself. So oftentimes with services, and this relates to the inconsistency, we paint the company with the same brush as the provider that provides the service to us. We don't view them as being distinct and separate. Whereas McDonald's, you get the coffee, right? And if you don't like McDonald's coffee because you have been influenced by, the devil has many tools, and you've been influenced by one of his tools, which is Starbucks. You don't necessarily think that the barista who handed you that tool of the devil is the face or the product of Starbucks, right? You're judging it on the quality of the product. But when you go to the masseuse, it is that person that you see, and you generally associate that person with the business and whether or not that business is any good. So it's very hard to separate this. The more complex the service, the more there is inseparability. If you come to my law firm and I don't do a very good job for you, you're going to have a hard time dissociating the law firm from me personally and your experience with that law firm, right? So there's this, because of the inconsistency, this leads to inseparability. So these four I's are oftentimes interrelated. And interaction is dependent upon the extent to which the customer has to be present. Obviously, for a massage, you have to be present for a lot of it. For law services, you have to be present for some of it. You have to come into the office, or we have to communicate some way, and I intake your unique situation and then work on your case, and you don't necessarily see what's going on behind the scenes. But with things like massage or hotel rooms or things like that, you have to be present. Medical services, you have to be present, and it's largely dependent on how much you tell the doctor. If you don't tell the doctor everything that's going on, which is hard to do in these times, because doctors have about 5 minutes to spend with you, and then they need to move on, and it's really hard to communicate in that 5 minutes what all is wrong. Maybe your level of care is going to be dependent upon that, right? And that's going to be inseparable from the sort of clinic that you are getting the service at. Inventory costs are highly perishable in services. What does that mean? I am standing here today lecturing to you, and I cannot get the 75 minutes back. I cannot be billing for my time while I am lecturing to you, and I will never get that back. If I have coffee grounds at McDonald's and I don't sell all of my coffee today at McDonald's, I can probably brew coffee and sell it tomorrow, right? Now, there's going to be some inventory cost in that if you're not turning over product at McDonald's and it's taking up space, that's a cost. But you can, in theory, sell that coffee tomorrow. It's not gonna expire tomorrow. Now, some of it may, some of the food may expire, but probably not, right? And you're going to have the opportunity, if you don't sell all of your sausage McMuffins today, you can sell them tomorrow. Not true. If I don't bill today for these hours, I can't make this up. It's gone. That's in the past, right? So the inventory costs are really, really high. So the service continuum. Most companies are a mix. They are not clearly a product-based or a service-based provider. If you sell copy machines, for example, to things like UCO, and we used to have to produce a lot of copies, not so much anymore because almost everything is now done online. When I first started teaching 30 years ago, students turned in papers in a hard copy, right? They had to go print off their paper in a computer lab, or actually, when I first started teaching, people actually used typewriters back then to type up papers. This is a thing that you've never even seen in your lifetime, but people actually used this device called a typewriter, and they would type up their papers and they would turn them in a hard copy. And every semester I would go down to the print shop in the college that I was teaching, and I didn't start out as a business professor. I started out as a liberal arts professor. That's the College of Hippy Dippy across the parking lot over there. And I would go to the print shop and I would have them print off copies of my exams for me. They didn't let me touch the copier because, those were very expensive tools and they were afraid that we might mess it up. So we weren't allowed to touch the copiers at that point in time. They collated and they did all of these things. All of those parts in a copier are highly susceptible to wear and tear. And so a service contract came along with those copiers to make sure that if they broke down, that somebody was out here to fix them, because it was pretty critical at that point in time that the copies get made so that we could give the tests at the time that we said that we were going to get. And we had to sort of plan. We would give our tests generally to the copy shop a week in advance to make sure that we got the copies in time, because if the copier broke down and you were trying to get the tests at the last minute, you were going to have a real problem. Now we can put them on D2L and we can send you to the computer lab or the testing center, and we don't have that many copies that are made. But they made this product called a copier, and then of course there's all this service that goes along with it, which is keeping that printer and that copier in good repair. So one of the things that we look at when we talk about the service continuum is distinguishing between the company's core offerings, which are they really product or service, and supplementary services. So as a lawyer, I am primarily a service provider, although I will probably provide you with tangible receivables, but you, again, don't want the tangible receivable for the thing in and of itself. Let's suppose that you come to me because you have a large estate and you want some estate planning, right? I'm going to provide you with tangible things that you can touch, but that's not really what you want. You want the thought that's behind those documents, right? So I'm primarily a service provider who tangentially provides you with things like copies of a will, which, you know, as much as we've gone to an electronic age, with regard to things like that, if you want to have a will, you still have to have pretty much a signed document, a wet, what we call a wet signature. You all know what a wet signature is? That's an actual, like, and it's amazing to me that you all don't know how to sign your name, because they didn't teach you cursive in school, did they? Did any of you learn cursive? Enough to sign your name, right? I have clients now that block print their name. It's just like incredible. And students don't know how to write in cursive, really. You probably should learn how to write in cursive, take notes in cursive. It helps you remember stuff better. So distinguishing between the company's core offerings, is it a product? The copy machine company is primarily a product company with tangential services provided. I am primarily a service provider with some tangential physical products provided, right? So we can classify services in a number of ways. We can classify them by the delivery method. Are they is the delivery required of people, doctors, lawyers, accountants? Or can the service be provided by mechanical means, by equipment like electric utilities, E-Trade, online banking? We can classify it as to whether or not it's a for-profit or a nonprofit. So lots of services are provided by nonprofits. The Red Cross provides emergency relief to disaster areas, for example. Are the services government sponsored, like federal, state, or local? For example, the United States Postal Service, police departments are service providers, fire departments, roads are services, right? That's a tangible thing that we drive on, and highways. We can classify them by how consumers purchase the services that we are talking about. Many services can't be evaluated prior to purchase. It's difficult to evaluate them prior to purchase. How do you evaluate legal services prior to purchase? What are you going to do to evaluate whether or not I'm a successful attorney? What? How do you research that? Okay, that's the answer I'm looking for. Students always come up with this. Some of the dumbest people in my law school class had great success rates if you look at their win-loss ratio. Why is that? I'll tell you why it is. I'm going to tell you because you won't come up with this on your own. When I went to law school, I went to a private law school because I hated OU so much that I refused to go there even though I was accepted. That's primarily because I went there as an undergraduate student, and they did everything they could to make our existence as undergraduate students miserable, in my opinion, at OU. So I refused to go there for law school. So I went to a private school. My brother also was admitted to OU, And he went to a private law school because he'd gone to OSU, so he hated OU so much, like with a fiery passion, right? Like both of us just hated OU with this fiery passion. So we both went to private law schools. When I graduated, tuition and fees at Oklahoma City University College of Law were $900 an hour. Let me say that again, $900 an hour for tuition and fees. I had colleagues who went to district attorney's offices and they had remarkably good win-loss ratios. 98% of their cases, they won. Why? Because the criminals were dumber than them. If you can't figure out that you cannot afford to go make $30,000 a year in the district attorney's office, at the time that's what they were paying when we graduated, after you have paid $100,000 for your degree and live, you are a candidate for natural deselection. But they had fantastic success rate in terms of win-loss. On the other hand, criminal defense lawyers, those are some really smart attorneys oftentimes, have horrible win-loss rates. Why? Because their clients. I can give you an example. When I was a baby attorney, I had this case. I took this case with this client who there was no evidence against him. Really, it was all circumstantial. And I said, you didn't confess. Did you talk to the police? He's like, no. I said, you didn't confess, did you? No, didn't confess. So we go to the arraignment, and I said, Your Honor, there's no evidence against my client. It's all circumstantial. We'd ask for a PR bond. And the district attorney says, well, we've got a confession. And I said, what? And I'm looking at my client. I said, did you confess? No. So I said, can I see that document? District attorney hands it to me. At the top of it, it says statement. His statement was, I did it. But because it said statement at the top of the form and not confession, he didn't think he had confessed. If that's your client, you're going to have you could be Johnny Cochran, and you're not getting that guy off. That guy's going to jail. You could be a fantastic attorney. He's going to jail, right? So it's really hard to evaluate these and looking at like these sort of objective facts. And oftentimes, I have a cousin who is he's a full professor of oncology at the University of Texas. So he studies, and his specialty is pancreatic cancer. If you get pancreatic cancer, you are going to die in all likelihood. Almost nobody survives that. Does that make him a really bad doctor? No, it means that he is doing research on one of the hardest diseases to cure. Two of my colleagues here, both within a year of each other, got pancreatic cancer. And they found out, and the day they found out, within 6 months, one of them was dead within 3 months, and the other one was dead within 6 months. Does that make them bad doctors? You can see it's really, really hard to evaluate these, right? So how do successful service companies operate? They understand how consumers make purchase decisions and how consumers evaluate those decisions. And then they have to present a differential advantage relative to competing offerings. How do lawyers do that? Well, it depends on what kind of legal services you are offering. Largely, if you are what we call a white shoe firm, you're not advertising. It's through mostly word of mouth and personal connection to people. If I do really well at writing an estate plan for somebody, they're probably going to tell their friends who are similarly situated to them that I did a good job, and that things appear to be going along well, right? So it's very difficult to do in many instances, but those companies that do it well find ways of differentiating themselves. Assessing service quality. So customers compare their expectations about their service to the actual experience that they have. What is my ideal massage versus what did I get? And the difference between expectations and experience can lead to a gap, right? And so we have to look at things like, what is the reliability? Again, this can be really, really hard. If you have a personal service like a massage, right? If that person is got, for example, arthritis in their hands, and they're, that could lead to a variability that they have a hard time controlling that day. If somebody wants really deep pressure tissue massage, right? Tangibility. What those aspects that are tangible, how can you control those? The responsiveness, assurance, and empathy. This is one of the biggest things. With regard to doctors, they've done studies on this. Your impression of your doctor within the first 2 minutes will oftentimes determine whether or not you will sue that doctor if something goes wrong. And the biggest factor in that is whether or not they think the doctor has empathy. So it's the doctor's bedside manner that will oftentimes determine whether or not you sue them. Any questions about services before I move to price? All right. So we organize marketing around 4 P's: product, place, promotion, and price. Price is the one P that, if you had to pull it out, may be the most important of the 4, because it is where all of the other business decisions that we make come together, and it's the part that we can objectively quantify in many instances. So we just talked about services, and we talked about how inconsistent and intangible services can be. But if you are inconsistent in these intangibles as a provider, it's likely going to be affected in the amount of money that you can charge and your ability to stay in business. And so fundamentally, that's going to be what we use to measure, in many instances, the success of a business. And so price is where all of these other business decisions come together. If we are successful in promoting our product, if we're successful in developing our product or service, it's going to be reflected in the price. We say that the price must be right. What does that mean? What does it mean to say that the price must be right?
People tend to not buy things that are overpriced, and they overbuy things that are underpriced.
Okay, so a lot of that is true to some extent, in that people have a tendency to, Americans in particular, they love deals, right? We love a bargain. I'm going to suggest to you that when you hire a lawyer, you don't want the bargain attorney, right? You do so at your own peril. But we do like bargains. So, right, the price has to be right. Now, again, Rolex doesn't discount, right? Rolex also doesn't really advertise in traditional ways that we might think of, right? So the price being right for Rolex is about a heuristic that says we are luxury, we are exclusive, we are, not Timex. Price represents what you are willing to sacrifice for the good or service that you provide. It is the most critical component of the 4 Ps, and yet there is no unifying theory with regard to pricing. We can tell you, with regard to promotion, for example, There is a unifying theory in promotion. It's called integrated marketing communication, and we will talk about that. That's the part of marketing that everybody thinks of as being marketing. And there is a unifying theory there. There are really good theories as to how you should get things to where, so this is the part of marketing that nobody thinks is marketing. It's called logistics. And we have really good models on how you do that, how you get the product or service to your consumer in a way that is the most convenient for them. We have really good, with regard to price, it's the most important decision, and there's no good theoretical model with regard to pricing. You would think that we would, after all of this time, because it's so important, it's like finance. If you've had finance, they will tell you the number one critical decision that a business makes is capital structure when they start. Are you going to provide the financing for your company through either debt or equity? And there is no theoretical basis as to which is better, debt or equity. It depends largely on the circumstances, the uniqueness of the business, and the same thing is true with price. We like sales. Rolex doesn't do sales. So you would think that they wouldn't be very popular, but they are, right? Like the American market is the biggest market. May not always be for Rolex. The Asian market is now, coming up, but for a long time, the American market was the biggest. Like these Swiss watches, one of our presidents used to be very proud of his Rolex, LBJ. Most American presidents have a tendency to wear American stuff. Not LBJ. Big honkin' Rolex. Price can be barter. And in many countries, we engage in barter. So for example, in Kenya, they use something called, or they did, I don't know if they still do, but when I took African political systems many, many years ago, they used something called the Kenyan shilling. Nobody wants that outside of Kenya. You're not going to find anybody who wants a Kenyan shilling. So how do they get about getting their goods? Well, they either have to pay for them, import them using American dollars, which is the world's reserve currency. Will it always be the world's reserve currency? I don't know. That's a good question. Could a cryptocurrency take over as being the world's currency? Could Bitcoin? I don't know. It's a good question. I would be very skeptical. My brother's a big investor in Bitcoin. He has a bunch of Bitcoin. And I was like, oh my God, this is a boondoggle. But there's actually one country that started using Bitcoin. So it's an official currency now of that country. I can't remember which one it was. What were you going to say? Maybe, I don't know. I'd have to look. But there was one country that was actually recognizing it as an official currency. I don't know. I generally view it as rent-seeking behavior, but go ahead. What? Yes, so it's not, the whole point is that it was not subject to the whims of some kind of government regulation. Now, in theory, all currency is what we call fiat currency. Even if you think about it from a theoretical standpoint, I would argue in the past, and I used to ask students this question, what backs up the US dollar? And inevitably, I would have somebody that would say gold. We have not been on the gold standard since 1973. In 1973, Richard Nixon floated the dollar, which means that the dollar is worth what? It's worth whatever anybody is willing to pay for it today, which is why it floats on a currency market, right? And there are people who make huge amounts of money doing currency changes. There are currency traders like George Soros who make lots and lots of money off of currency and in fact have bankrupt economies. George Soros basically bankrupted the Mexican economy in one day in something that was called the tequila effect, and that was in the 1990s, I think. So currencies float, and it's really hard at this point in time to go back because they are all fiat currencies. And I would argue that even gold was actually a fiat currency because, in theory, gold, I mean, it has some limited value in that you can use it. I wear a lot of gold jewelry because I don't know, I just like it. So it has some value, some useful value, but by and large, on the whole, it's not really terribly useful. They do make one antibiotic, I think, out of a gold base, which is called Augmentin. But other than that, it's not really terribly useful, right? I mean, you can't really build anything out of it because it's so rare that it's hard to find. You're not building houses. So even that, I would argue, is fiat currency. So I would think that it would be hard, but yet you're correct in that if it starts becoming official currency, then governments can regulate it. I mean, governments regulate their currency. What is the Kenyan shilling worth? Well, they peg it. They peg that currency to something else. And they say this is what it is by government decree, that this is what it's worth. What Mexico did for many, many years, and I don't know if they still do, is they pegged, and it changed, but they pegged the peso to the dollar. And that's what a lot of countries do, right? They peg their currency to the US dollar or to the pound sterling or something like that. So given the fact that nobody wants the Kenyan shilling, a lot of stuff in business to business is done through barter. So price can be barter, and barter is in the billions of dollars in domestic and international trade in the United States. We have local examples of bartering. They're called swap meets. They're very popular in Oklahoma. So you go to these swap meets and people will swap stuff. Like if you've ever gone to a motorcycle swap meet, they'll swap, parts and things like that. Oh, I've got this, you need that, and people will actually engage in that. The price equation. So price is the list price minus incentives and allowances plus extra fees. The clearest way of thinking about this is to think about like airline tickets. You see the price for the airline ticket when you get online, and is that the actual price? Probably not, right? That's the fare, and then they're going to add landing fees and all this other stuff on there, baggage fees. It used to be that when you bought your ticket, you got all of this stuff. They actually, when I was a kid growing up, they actually fed you on the airlines. I mean, that was amazing. I went to Hawaii this last summer. I'm a licensed commercial pilot. I think I've told you all that, and I fly competitive aerobatics. So I tend to like to fly myself places rather than go on the commercial airlines. And as a result of the fact that we're now at war with Iran, I'm very skeptical of although I'm going to have to get on an airplane on Friday to go to a sales competition for our students. And I'm a little nervous about that because, seems to me that as we engage in a foreign war, we might become targets for terrorism again. And so that's a little arresting concept to me. But we had to go to I had to go to Hawaii this summer with my family because that's what they wanted to do. And we flew on Southwest, and that's a long flight. The flight from Los Angeles to Hawaii is something like 4 hours, 4.5 hours. And even on that flight, I mean, they technically fed us, but it was like granola bars or something. It was not like real food. When I was a kid, they actually gave you like real food. There was this stuff called airline chicken. You can now find it in restaurants. It was kind of a popular dish. Several restaurants in Paseo make airline chicken. Paseo Grill, for example, has a really good airline chicken. They actually fed you. They don't actually do that anymore, or if they do, they charge for it, unless you're on an international flight that's over so many hours. But so you've got all these extra fees, right? Most Americans say that they perceive value in the price. They use price as what we call a heuristic or a shortcut for quality. 84% of US consumers say higher price means higher value and better quality. Is that true? Nike, for example, used to manufacture their own shoes. Nike is not a manufacturer anymore. Nike is a brand manager. Those shoes are made by companies in developing nations that make shoes for a lot of other companies. is Nike's value, but Nike charges a lot more for their products. They're pretty proud of their product, not as proud of their products as Lululemon, but they're pretty proud of their products. Are they a better quality than the other shoes that come off that assembly line? I don't know. Maybe if the design calls for higher stitching quality, right? From time to time, I have students in this class that are fashion marketers. Anybody in here a fashion marketer? You're a fashion marketer. Is it better? Like, do you know, like, is the Nike, do they have higher specification quality for their shoes and goods that come off of the plants and other places? Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Even if they're like $500, $600, they're being made by the exact same company who was making, say, like, Louis Vuitton. It's just the fact that they stamp a different name on it. They're all under the same company.
And it's all the same quality, basically.
It's usually all the exact same.
I could see where you could specify. I mean, one of the things that happens in business to business marketing is specifications become very, very important. And if Nike started noticing a significant percentage of their clothing is falling apart in the washing machine, because Nike is one of those things that historically you didn't send to the dry cleaners, right? I mean, it's wash and wear. That's the whole purpose of it. It's sportswear, it's athletic wear. It should be fairly durable. If they started noticing, they might demand a higher quality production. But you know, most things, you know, you go to Walmart and the moisture wicking dry kind of athletic wear, they have the same stuff. It looks pretty much the same with a different label on it as some of the other stuff. Now, I people tell me they just insist that Lululemon is just so much better and fits just so much better than the stuff that you buy at Les Target. That's Target, or you know, or Walmart. I don't know. So, do they still talk a lot about in fashion marketing? They have a whole textiles class and stuff like that. So, and I've asked this question before: is it significantly different textile than is found in other products? And the answer that most of your colleagues have told me is no, it's not. It's a branding issue, right? I mean, yeah, you're paying for that swoosh, right? Or you're paying for, I don't know what the hell that thing is that Lululemon has, but you're paying for having that on your, you know, pocket or whatever, or North Face. So. But 84% of Americans believe that higher price equals higher quality. And that may be true in some instances. Price is a heuristic among attorneys, for example. That is, a lot of times people will look at whether or not you have to pay a higher price for the white shoe law firm. My brother currently charges $650 an hour for his services. So, you know, I guess he's pretty proud of his legal skills and acumen. And people pay it. So decoding the price. It can oftentimes be difficult to decode, and I use airline tickets again as the example here, because you look at that price and then it's highly dependent upon where they are going, the gate fees and things like that, whether or not you have to pay for all the other extras that are not included. One of the things that they have started doing, when they started charging for baggage, I absolutely hated it, because everybody decided that they were just going to do carry-on. And my goal when I walk on an airplane is to have nothing in my hands. I want nothing in my hands. And all of these people that I travel with, they're like, they don't lose your luggage. You want to know why they don't lose your luggage? Because of modern logistics, right? We are very good at this. Everything is scanned, and it's almost never happens that luggage gets lost in the modern world. It used to, right? When they actually had to look at tags. But now everything goes through a scanner, an optical reader, which is why they put several tags on your bag so it doesn't get lost. But these people that are cramming their luggage, and it makes me crazy. I'm like, get out of the aisle, move. Like, you should not have that bag. But because they charge baggage fees, which is one of the things that I loved about Southwest, is you had 2 bags that fly free, but there are still these people that insist that they've got to have their bag. And I'm like, ugh. You know, pay the baggage fee. My goal is to walk on with nothing but my cell phone on an airplane. So, you've got all of these other fees that you have. And so decoding the price can be really, really difficult. And a lot of times you don't think about it, particularly with airline fees, because you don't think about it until you pay for the ticket at one point, right? And you're going to pay for the baggage fee and all this other stuff, the food that you buy, the drinks on the plane. And so you're not really thinking about the total cost because we don't tend to think that far in advance. So consumers oftentimes fail to do the math. So, for example, they used to have all these white sales at Macy's. This was a big thing that they did. So they would say 25% off store-wide and take another 25% off at the register. And a lot of people think that that means that you get a 50% discount, and it doesn't. Let's take, for example, a $100 item. So it's 25% off. That means that the price before the second discount is $75, right? And now you're getting 25% off $75. So it's not 50% off. You can't stack it. But people, they just quickly do it, and they don't do the complete math. So it can oftentimes result in a lack of understanding on the part of consumers because they fail to do the actual math that is needed to figure out what the actual price is that they're paying. If you know that you're going to get on the airline and you're going to order, the food from the special menu or the drinks, you need to figure that into the price, but nobody does. So price affects revenues and costs for a business. So the profit equation, and you may actually have to calculate a profit or loss in the next exam. Total revenues minus total costs is your profit, which is the unit price times the quantity produced minus the fixed costs plus the variable costs. So you have to understand what fixed costs are and what variable costs are in this model, right? Or in the equation. I'm sorry, not the model, the equation. So fixed costs are things that are capital expenditures that you paid for. Variable costs are those things that if you have to produce more, what does it cost you per unit? If you have to increase the number of people on the line, what is that going to cost you? If I own a restaurant and the price, and I sell, for example, seafood is often largely dependent on a fluctuating market rate for a lot of those products, which is why if you go to really nice restaurants, seafood restaurants, which I tend to not go to because I don't like seafood, they'll say market. If you have, some kind of exotic fish on the menu, they'll say market price because that price varies, depending upon the catch. If it's, something that's hard to catch and they have to pay more, that's going to be a variable cost. Business pricing objectives. Again, there is no one theoretical model as to why you should price something the way you do. Some businesses price for profit. They price maybe for long-term, foregoing immediate profit to penetrate a competitive market. American firms are not good at this. Other countries are. When I was a kid growing up, if you had a Japanese car, that was viewed as being an inferior product. But what the Japanese did was their government subsidized and they learned how to make quality cars. And I can tell you that that is no longer the perception in the market. The perception became, as a result of that, that they would forego pricing and even take losses in order to penetrate the market and then work on quality Japanese cars are generally viewed now. In reality, where's the car produced? That like lots of Japanese cars or Japanese branded cars are manufactured where? In the United States, right? When I was a kid growing up, if you had a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW, it came from Germany. I think BMW has a plant, it's either in North Carolina or South Carolina, I think, right? So, but you can price for profit. A lot of companies price for a return on investment, which is short term. Particularly small businesses have to get an immediate return on their investment. Some will price for quarter over quarter. Sales, you can price to increase sales, to maintain market share. Some will price for unit volume. Many companies are survival. They're pricing just to stay in business. And then there are what we call now social entrepreneurs, like Tom's, which has a social responsibility built into their price. Bombas does this. So Bombas followed in Tom's footsteps. What was Tom's thing? One for one, right? For every pair of shoes they sold, they donated a pair of shoes. Bombas came along and did the same thing. Anybody have Bombas socks? A few of you. They're really good socks. They're really expensive. Why? Because they price one for one, right? Their pricing model includes being able to donate. Their whole thing, their advertisements are socks are the #1 most requested item in homeless shelters. So pricing constraints. Demand is obviously a constraint. And this is hard to see, but one of the things, let me see if I turn off some of the lights in here. If you can see this. There we go. One of the things that you have to remember is that demand, and I used to have my office, I've had like 15 offices over the years here at UCO. They kept moving my office for many, many years. And at one point in time, I was across the hall from an economist, and every semester I would have to listen to her talk to students that would come to her office and say, I just don't understand. She'd like, you have to remember that demand is the entire curve. So you have to distinguish between movement along the curve and a shift in the curve when you think about these things. So demand is important. Are you going to have a movement along the curve in your pricing, or are you experiencing an actual demand shift? What can cause a demand shift? Well, when we had COVID, that had a huge impact, for example, on the demand for a lot of goods. And so you had an actual shift in the demand curve for very basic things that we didn't even think about. So toilet paper. The manufacturers of consumer toilet paper are not the same as the manufacturers of commercial toilet paper. So the toilet paper that we put in the restrooms here at UCO, the sandpaper that they put in the restrooms here at UCO is not the same as the fluffy and soft Charmin that you all buy. What happened during COVID? Well, everybody stopped going to work. That led to a huge increase in demand for toilet paper at home. And as you may recall, if you went through that period of time, people were running out, people were hoarding toilet paper because they couldn't find it, right? There was an increase in demand because people stopped using the restroom at work and were now at home all the time. So cost of production and marketing can be a price constraint. Over the long haul, you have to cover your costs. The product life cycle plays a role in pricing. Is it a new product that people want, that they're willing to try? Or are you in a highly competitive, something like a consumer packaged good where you release a new product and you're going to have to penetrate that market through cheaper pricing in order to build demand for it? Do you have a single product or an entire product line? In the company that I worked for, one of the things that we did, we had this loss leader in the accounting department who were very short-sighted, constantly wanted us to abandon this line. We couldn't charge very much for this line, but it was a really good product. It was called Learning Letter Sounds, and it was our reading for people who were not at grade level. And this became really important under the Bush administration because they offered all kinds of negative incentives for school districts that were not producing people that were reading at grade level. And so we had all of these school districts that were pretty desperate to get their students up, particularly in poor districts, to grade level. And we had this product called Learning Letter Sounds. We couldn't charge a lot for it because it was a single standalone product. But what it did do was it got us in the door at a lot of these districts. And once they saw this product, then they wanted to know about other products that we provided, right? Other aspects of the LMS. And so it was really, really important that we kept that product. So are you just a producer of a single product, or do you have an entire product line that you are willing to sacrifice maybe the price of one in order to get, like we did, a bigger share of your business once you discovered the quality of the product that we produce? The costs of changing prices are constraints, and the types of competitive markets that you're in. So the company that I worked for, that manufactured learning management systems for the K-12 market, that's not a market that there's just a ton of people in it, right? I mean, there's not like 83 million producers of learning management systems for the K-12 market. It was a very small competitive, market compared to something like gas stations. You have a lot of choice in gas stations, although maybe not really, but you have more choice, right? You have a lot of choice when you think about things like, cereal brands and stuff that you can choose from. So the types of markets are going to be a constraint on pricing. This leads to, you need to be able to estimate revenue. So total revenue is your total price times the total quantity sold. That's different than average revenue, which is the total revenue divided by the quantity. Marginal revenue is a change that results from producing one additional unit of a product. And you need to know these for the exam. Price elasticity. Are prices elastic? Now, a lot of textbooks will tell you that things like gasoline are inelastic. That is true to a point, but I had at one point in time a fairly large boat that had 2 Volvo Penta motors in it. When I was selling that boat, I had somebody come look at it and they're like, how many miles to the gallon does she get? And I'm like, if you're asking that question, you don't need this boat. And boats don't go on miles to the gallon, right? I mean, it depends on a lot of things, like how fast you go, what the condition of the water is. If it's really choppy, right, you're not going to go as far. You're going to burn a lot more fuel. And if you went full bore with it had 2 100-gallon tanks, and you could empty those tanks. If you went full out with both motors, you could empty those tanks in about 30 minutes. So I was like, if you're worried, I think maybe you need a sailboat, because if you're worried about, miles per gallon, you need something else, because this is, like this burns a lot of hydrocarbons. So I point this out because when gas gets to, if the price per gallon at the pump in the United States is, say, $4.50 on a lake. Now, a big boat like the one that I had, you cannot go to the gas station and fill up, right? You couldn't, it was 36 feet long, 12 feet wide, and weighed 23,000 pounds. You're not pulling that boat out of the water and going down and filling up the gas station, which meant that you were filling up at a marina. And if gas is $4.50 at the pump in Edmond, Oklahoma, gas on a marina where there's very limited options, right? At some of the lakes in Oklahoma, there may only be one marina. You are a captive audience. And so if it was $4.50 at the pump, it's going to be closer to $10 a gallon at the pump on the lake. When the price of gas gets to $10 per gallon on the lake, you see very few people out there wakeboarding. Whereas if the price of gas is closer to $5 a gallon on the lake, you'll find a lot of people out there wakeboarding or running the personal watercraft, which also go through an astronomical amount of, like the Wave Runner that I have has 25-gallon tank. You can empty that in 2 hours if you have nephews like I do that ride continually. Like the minute that hits the water, they're on it and they're going. And when prices at the lake are about $10, you see very few people out there. You see a lot of people out there trolling and fishing, and far fewer people out there wakeboarding, right? So elastic is, if you have an increase in price, it results in a large decrease in demand. Inelastic is a 1% increase in price, produces less than a 1% decrease in demand. And if you have a unitary elasticity, you have 1 for 1. So a 1% increase in price will result in a 1% decrease in demand. Arriving at the final price. So you can have demand-oriented pricing. The demand-oriented pricing models are things like skimming. The iPhone, when it was released, was super expensive because they knew that there was a hardcore group of Apple people who were innovators. When we talk about innovators, we're talking about the way we evaluate a person's choices based on things like psychographics. So Strategic Business Insights comes up with this, model of what motivates people to spend and whether or not they have high access to resources or low access to resources, and whether or not they're motivated by ideals, experiences, and things like that, right? And it comes up with a 2x3 matrix, and then there are 2 groups that fall outside because they're motivated by all of those sorts of things. On the top end and on the bottom end, they're just kind of survivors, right? But innovators, people who are attracted to the latest and greatest and are willing to try things, they're not motivated by prestige necessarily. They're just interested in the experience. And Apple, when they released the iPhone, a lot of people who were committed to Apple and were innovators wanted to try the iPhone, even though it was an unproven product and whether or not it was going to work very well, particularly if you were using it in any way, shape, or form for business, they were willing to try it anyway. So you can skim the price. You can offer an initial high price, recognizing that there's going to be this dedicated group, and you can maximize your profits. At the opposite end, if you're doing something that's like a consumer packaged good, you may have to use penetration pricing, where you're trying to get people to try the product. So if you're releasing a new cereal brand, you may have to use penetration pricing because there's lots of choices, or at least their perception is that there are lots of choices in the market. If you go down the cereal aisle at Walmart, you have lots and lots and lots of, now it's all pretty much combinations of corn, by the way, and it's probably not very good for you, healthy. But there's the perception that there's lots of stuff. And there's a lot of clutter and a lot of noise in that market. Prestige pricing. Normally what we see is that if you increase the price, demand decreases. Sometimes the opposite happens, and this happened with Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer had an average price at one time of their watches of about $500 per watch. They increased that price and now it's gone beyond this, right? Tag Heuer increased the price, their average price of their watch models, to $1,000. And rather than losing money, they increased sales because Tag Heuer became more like Rolex. Its perception was it was more elite now. So that actually is an example of where you had, prestige pricing in play, and people all of the sudden viewed Tag Heuer as more like a luxury brand of watch. Price lining assumes that demand is inelastic between price points. So you have various prices, but not in between those price points. Odd even pricing is a model that people use, oftentimes, again, with consumer packaged goods, because consumers will look at the price and it's less than something. Some companies target pricing, which is where you estimate what consumers will pay, and then you back into that price to get to what you think consumers will pay based on market research. Then you have bundle pricing, where you package things together. At one point in time, home internet services were this way. It was very popular to bundle price home cable, internet, and telephone. What led to a kind of a decrease in the bundle of that was, well, nobody has a home phone anymore. Like, nobody wants that part of the bundle anymore. It was for a long time, people still wanted the home phone, because if you had an alarm system, that's how you hooked the phone up to the alarm, right, company, so that they could be notified if somebody broke into your home. But you don't need that anymore. That model's long gone. Nobody has a home phone anymore. Your alarm system has got cellular in it, right? Which is actually, I guess, better, because, if you cut the phone lines, you still have security, right? Yield management is like airline tickets. That's dynamic pricing. And it's really, hotels do this now. They use dynamic pricing based on demand. You can use cost-oriented pricing. This is what they do in supermarkets. It's a standard markup. Or you can also have Homeland as an example of the Homeland Corporation came out with a secondary line of stores. Generally, those stores that they didn't want to remodel, they have done Cash Saver, which is a price plus, a cost plus pricing model. There are profit-oriented models where you use target profit, target ROI, or return on sales. Competition-oriented pricing is usually used in things that are sort of customary. So forever and ever and ever in, for example, the soft drink market with regard to vending machines, there was a standard customary price. Almost everybody for years and years and years when I was a kid growing up, you went to a vending machine, and when I was a young kid, a Coke, a can of Coke, or a can of Pepsi, or anything that came out of a vending machine was 50 cents. That was just sort of the standard model. Now, that's no longer true, and vending machines are harder. At hotels, it was slightly higher. It was usually $1 when I was a kid growing up. You can't find a vending machine now in a hotel anymore. They just don't exist. You have to go down to the market where they will absolutely, rake you over the coals. And a bottle of Coke or a can of Coke is no longer $1. It's $4, depending on the hotel. Competitive at, above, or below. And then loss leader pricing, this is where you use, and again, a lot of grocery stores use this. They would advertise low prices on something to get you into the store, so that then you would buy other stuff. Those were usually, they would use a loss leader and a staple, things that everybody generally used to have, or the perception was you had to have them, and then you would get in the store and buy other things. Any questions about price? All right, so if you are not in a group, I said I would do that. Let me stop the stream. And if you need